How does a league spend decades fighting for attention, finally get a superstar who brings the whole world to the screen, and then somehow turn that same superstar into a problem? Because that's what this is starting to look like. Not a basketball argument. Not rookie mistakes. Not she'll learn with time. This is what happens when the spotlight gets so big it stops fitting inside the office that's supposed to manage it. And the reason this story is blowing up right now isn't because of one clip or one quote or one hot take. It's because the public is starting to believe something way more dangerous. That the people in charge don't just misunderstand Caitlin Clark's value. They're uncomfortable with it. And when leadership gets uncomfortable, they don't always protect the star. Sometimes they try to shrink the star. Sometimes they try to control the star. And sometimes they make the kind of comments that reveal what they really think. Which brings us to the moment everything caught fire. Because one reported remark, whether you believe it was said exactly like that or not, hit the sport like gasoline. And then Stephen A. Smith grabbed the match. Here's what made this situation feel so personal to fans. It wasn't just a debate over money. It wasn't even just a debate over respect. It was the feeling that Caitlin Clark, after everything she's done to pull attention into women's basketball, was being spoken about like she should be thankful just to exist inside the league. And when that idea started circulating, it didn't land like normal sports drama. It landed like a warning. Because fans didn't hear context. They didn't hear business. They heard, know your place. And the timing was brutal. This is a league that's openly talked about growth. A league that's celebrated new audiences. A league that's benefited from sold-out arenas, spike moments, viral highlights, and national conversations that just weren't happening at this level before. So when the public hears anything that sounds like leadership is minimizing the very player driving the momentum, people don't process it as a misunderstanding. They process it as insecurity. Now, the commissioner denied the remark, and that matters, because denials are part of the official record. But here's the problem with moments like this. Even a denial can't erase the emotional reality once the audience has decided what the tone feels like. Because the outrage wasn't built on a transcript. It was built on a pattern people think they've been watching all season. The pattern where Caitlin's success is treated like it's inconvenient. The pattern where the league celebrates the moment, but seems tense about who created it. The pattern where the biggest star in the sport keeps getting discussed like she's an issue to manage instead of an engine to fuel. And when that perception forms, the story stops being about whether a quote was perfectly accurate. It becomes, why does this even sound believable? That's the part that haunted the league for days. Because if the public believes leadership sees its biggest star as a headache, not a headline, then every silence starts to feel loud. Every non-celebration starts to feel intentional. And every time the league tries to steer attention away from her, fans don't see balance. They see avoidance. Which is exactly why Stephen A. didn't treat this like a normal controversy. He treated it like exposure. Stephen A. Smith doesn't move like a cautious analyst when he thinks something is wrong. When he believes the story is bigger than the headline, he stops debating and starts sounding like he's talking directly to the people behind the curtain. And that's what made his reaction hit differently. Because he wasn't just defending Caitlin Clark as a player. He was defending what she represents, leverage. He basically framed it like this. If you're running a sports league and a player becomes a cultural rocket, your job is not to resent the rocket. Your job is to build around it, amplify it, protect it, use it to lift everyone. That's how competent leadership behaves. So when he started implying the opposite, that leadership energy felt cold, irritated, defensive, he wasn't just calling it bad optics. He was calling it a business error, a self-inflicted wound. And he pushed the point that fans have been whispering for months. Caitlin Clark doesn't need the league the way most rookies do. She has her own gravity. She brings an audience that existed before WNBA marketing touched it. She brings attention that doesn't need permission. She brings brand power that can stand on its own legs. And that independence changes the relationship. Because the traditional power structure goes like this. League gives platform, player needs platform, league controls narrative. But Caitlin flips it. Player brings platform, league benefits from platform, player gains leverage. That's why this moment is so touchy. Because if leadership isn't the main source of power anymore, then leadership has to adapt. And adapting means accepting that the future might be built around an individual star, even if that makes the office feel smaller. Stephen A. wasn't just angry about a quote. He was angry about what it revealed. That maybe some people in charge don't want a star this big. Because stars this big create a question nobody in power wants to answer. Who's really in control now? And once that question starts circulating, it doesn't stay in the media. It reaches players. It reaches brands. It reaches the audience. And the next phase of the story gets even more intense. Because once control feels threatened, institutions don't just talk. They enforce. Here's the part most people miss when they talk about this situation. The tension isn't personal. It's economic. For decades, the WNBA has been built around a collective identity. The league sells itself as a movement, a shared struggle, a group effort that matters more than any single name. That approach made sense when attention was scarce, when visibility had to be earned slowly, when stars were introduced carefully, when growth came in inches, not waves. But Caitlin Clark didn't arrive in inches. She arrived like a flood, and floods don't ask permission. She brought a new audience that didn't come through traditional pipelines. These weren't legacy fans raised on league history. These were casual viewers, younger fans, people who showed up because one player felt undeniable. That kind of attention is powerful and dangerous because it doesn't belong to the institution. It belongs to the person. When fans tune in for Caitlin, not for the league, the balance shifts. Suddenly, the organization isn't the gate anymore. It's the road. And roads don't like being reminded they're replaceable. This is where the old guard gets uncomfortable. Because the old system works best when stars rise within it, not above it. When players depend on the league for validation, income, and exposure. Caitlin Clark flipped that dynamic almost overnight. Her endorsements didn't come from league partnerships. Her reach didn't depend on league promotion. Her relevance didn't need league approval. That independence created a quiet panic. Not because she did anything wrong, but because she exposed something fragile. If one player can bring this much attention without permission, what does that say about who really drives value? That question doesn't just threaten hierarchy. It threatens identity. And when identity is threatened, institutions don't adapt gracefully. They tighten control. Which leads to the next phase of this story, the part where rules start getting mentioned more loudly than usual. Once control feels like it's slipping, the language always changes. You hear less about excitement, less about growth, less about opportunity, and more about rules, standards, conduct, discipline. That's not accidental, because rules are one of the few tools institutions still control completely. Now, to be clear, no one announced a formal suspension plan. No official warning letter went public. Nothing like that. But conversations don't need to be official to be effective. All it takes is the idea entering the ecosystem, the suggestion that someone might be pushing boundaries, the implication that behavior could be monitored, the whisper that consequences exist. Once that language starts circulating, the pressure is felt even if nothing is enforced. Fans picked up on it immediately. Every technical foul became a talking point. Every on-court reaction was replayed. Every moment of frustration was dissected. Not because Caitlin Clark was doing anything unusual, but because heightened scrutiny always follows power shifts. When a player becomes too big to ignore, the system starts watching them more closely than everyone else. That's how control reasserts itself. And here's why this part matters. Discipline talk isn't just about behavior. It's about leverage. It sends a message, not just to the player, but to everyone watching, that the institution still decides what's acceptable. Even if the star brings the audience. Even if the star brings the money. Even if the star brings the moment. This is why fans reacted so strongly. They weren't responding to one call, one foul, or one rule. They were responding to the tone. The sense that the league was more interested in managing Caitlin Clark than protecting her. More interested in controlling the narrative than celebrating it. And that perception is deadly. Because once fans believe leadership sees its biggest star as a liability instead of an asset, trust erodes fast. And trust, once gone, doesn't come back through statements. It comes back through behavior. Which brings us to the most uncomfortable part of this entire situation. Because while leadership debated tone, rules, and control, Caitlin Clark's value outside the league was exploding. And it made everything worse. This is where the story stopped being emotional and started becoming dangerous. Because feelings can be debated. Money can't. While the league was trying to manage perception, something else was happening quietly in the background. Caitlin Clark's off-court value was exploding in real time. Not gradually. Not hypothetically. Immediately. Every major commercial she appeared in wasn't just an endorsement. It was a statement. High production, prime placement, massive reach. She wasn't being framed as a promising rookie or a league ambassador. She was being framed as a cultural force. And that distinction mattered. Because when casual fans saw those commercials, they didn't see WNBA player Caitlin Clark. They saw Caitlin Clark. Independent, confident, unmistakably bigger than the league logo attached to her jersey. That's the part that rattled leadership. Not the money itself, but what the money represented. Independence. When a player makes more off the court than on it, the traditional power structure collapses. The league can't threaten relevance anymore. It can't withhold opportunity. It can't frame itself as the gate. The gate no longer matters. And every time another ad dropped, that reality became harder to ignore. Brands weren't waiting for league approval. They weren't coordinating with league messaging. They weren't protecting the collective image. They were betting on the individual. That embarrassed the institution. Because for decades, the league tried to sell the idea that the system was the star, that the shield mattered more than the name. Caitlin Clark shattered that illusion in a matter of months. One player did what years of league marketing never fully accomplished. She made women's basketball feel unavoidable. And instead of celebrating that, leadership appeared to resent it. That resentment wasn't loud. It was cold. Silence when there should have been amplification. Distance when there should have been pride. Awkwardness where confidence should have lived. Fans noticed. Because silence, in moments like this, speaks louder than applause. And the more the league failed to embrace her commercial success, the more people started asking the same uncomfortable question. Why does it feel like they don't want her to be this big? That question is where the story turned toxic. Here's the part that made longtime fans uneasy. Great leagues protect their stars. They don't coddle them. They don't excuse everything. But they protect them. Because stars drive growth, and growth keeps the league alive. What people started noticing with Caitlin Clark was the opposite. The protection felt inconsistent. Hard fouls went unchecked longer than expected. Incidents were slow-walked. Discipline felt reactive instead of preventative. Now, was there an official memo saying, "Let it happen"? Of course not. That's not how this works. But culture doesn't need instructions. It needs signals. And the signal many fans believed they were seeing was this. If leadership isn't fully behind her, no one else has to be either. That perception is dangerous. Because when a league doesn't clearly defend its biggest asset, it creates a vacuum. And vacuums get filled with aggression, resentment, and opportunism. Suddenly, every hit felt intentional. Every whistle felt late. Every non-call felt loaded. Fair or not, that's how the audience processed it. And perception in sports often becomes reality. Stephen A. Smith leaned into this hard. He suggested that when executives act cold toward their own star, it gives everyone else permission to treat her the same way. Not officially. Psychologically. And once fans believe the league office is indifferent, or worse, irritated, by a player's rise, everything gets reinterpreted through that lens. Every silence becomes shade. Every delay becomes disrespect. Every enforcement becomes selective. That's how trust erodes. Not in one dramatic moment, but slowly, through a pattern of small signals that add up to one big feeling. That Caitlin Clark wasn't being protected. She was being tolerated. And tolerance is a terrible way to treat the person carrying your future. Because while leadership hesitated, the audience made a choice. They didn't side with the institution. They sided with the player. And once that happens, the balance of power starts shifting in ways no press release can fix. Here's what leadership misunderstood about this entire moment. Fans don't need a smoking gun to lose trust. They don't need a leaked email. They don't need a confirmed quote. They don't need a press conference where someone admits fault. They just need a pattern that feels wrong. And once that pattern forms, it spreads faster than facts ever could. At first, the reaction was subtle. It wasn't an organized backlash. It was more like a shift in tone. People who were excited started sounding confused. People who were neutral started sounding suspicious. And the most dangerous part, it wasn't the hardcore fans doing it. It was the casual viewers. The people Caitlin Clark brought into the sport. The ones who don't have long memories of WNBA history, don't know the internal politics, and don't care about protecting anyone's legacy. Those viewers don't argue. They don't debate context for weeks. They make a simple decision. Does this feel fair or not? And when it doesn't feel fair, they don't write think pieces. They leave. That's why this is different from normal sports drama. Normal sports drama is loud but temporary. This kind of drama changes behavior. People started noticing small things and treating them like clues. Why did official messaging feel hesitant instead of proud? Why did every conversation around Caitlyn's success come with an asterisk? Why did it feel like the league wanted the attention, but didn't want to admit who was generating it? Even when there wasn't concrete proof, the vibe felt off. And in entertainment, vibe is reality. Then the internet did what it always does. It connected dots. Fans started compiling screenshots, comparing post timing, tracking which highlights were boosted quickly and which ones felt delayed, watching who got celebrated loudly and who got acknowledged quietly. To a league office, that might sound ridiculous. To a modern audience, it's normal. Because fans don't just watch games anymore. They watch the machine around the games. And the moment they believe that machine is working against the star, the machine becomes the villain. That's exactly what started happening. The comments shifted. Instead of "she's amazing," it became, "why do they treat her like this?" Instead of "this is great for the league," it became, "the league doesn't even like her." Instead of "they'll figure it out," it became, "they're going to fumble this." That shift matters more than any headline. Because when fans start framing leadership as the obstacle, everything leadership does afterward gets interpreted through suspicion. If they praise her, it feels forced. If they stay quiet, it feels petty. If they enforce rules, it feels targeted. If they don't enforce rules, it feels negligent. It becomes a no-win loop. And once the audience enters that loop, it's almost impossible to pull them back out with messaging alone. Because fans aren't just reacting to what happened. They're reacting to what they think will happen next. That's the real fuel. People began expecting the league to mishandle the moment. And when audiences expect mismanagement, they interpret every decision as confirmation. That expectation spread into sports media. You could hear it in the way segments were framed. Even when hosts tried to sound balanced, their questions revealed the suspicion. Why isn't this being embraced more? Why does it feel tense? Why is the league struggling to control the narrative? Those aren't basketball questions. Those are trust questions. And trust questions are contagious. Once they enter the mainstream conversation, they don't leave quietly. The most brutal part is that this type of distrust doesn't require anyone to be proven guilty. It only requires leadership to feel misaligned with the audience. And right now, the audience's instinct is simple. If Caitlin Clark is bringing in new fans, new money, and new attention, why does it feel like the league is fighting its own momentum? That question stuck. And because it stuck, the audience began turning the situation into a story with clear roles. Caitlin as the engine, the fans as the movement, leadership as the resistance. Whether that's fair or not doesn't even matter anymore. Because once the audience agrees on a storyline, that storyline becomes the reality the league has to manage. And the league didn't just lose control of a narrative. It triggered something worse. The audience started deciding they trusted the player more than the institution. And once that happens, the power shift isn't coming. It's already here. Here's where the situation quietly crossed a line the league couldn't walk back from. Because fans can argue. Media can speculate. Social platforms can explode and cool off again. But sponsors don't move emotionally. They move strategically. And long before any public fallout reached its peak, sponsors were already watching this situation with growing unease. Not because they cared about online arguments, but because something felt unstable. From a brand perspective, Caitlin Clark represented clarity. She had a clean narrative, clear momentum, a rapidly growing audience that was young, engaged, and loyal. The league, on the other hand, suddenly looked conflicted. Messaging felt inconsistent. Tone felt hesitant. Energy felt divided. And brands hate division, because division introduces risk. Sponsors don't want to attach themselves to moments that feel tense or unresolved. They want alignment, confidence, forward motion. What they started noticing was a gap. Caitlin Clark's personal brand was accelerating, fast, sharp, unmistakable. League branding felt slower, more cautious, almost defensive. That contrast raised questions in boardrooms. Why does the star feel ahead of the league? Why isn't the league amplifying what's clearly working? Why does it feel like the organization is struggling to keep up with its own momentum? Those questions don't come with accusations. They come with spreadsheets. Brands began tracking engagement metrics more closely. Click-through rates, audience sentiment, content performance. And the data told a story no one could ignore. When Caitlin Clark was centered, interest spiked. When she wasn't, interest softened. Not collapsed, softened. And softness is dangerous, because it signals lost potential. This is where the billion-dollar mistake, idea stops sounding dramatic and starts sounding realistic. It's not about a single sponsorship deal or a single ad campaign. It's about compounding opportunity. Every year a league fails to fully capitalize on a generational star, it doesn't just lose revenue, it loses growth velocity. Sponsors see that. They see what could be built, and they see hesitation instead. And hesitation is the fastest way to cool enthusiasm. Quietly, brands began hedging. They didn't pull out. They didn't issue statements. They diversified. More budget toward individual partnerships. More emphasis on player-led campaigns. More focus on content that didn't rely on league approval. That's a subtle but powerful shift. Because when sponsors start prioritizing individuals over institutions, it signals a lack of confidence in leadership's direction. And once that confidence cracks, it rarely fully returns. What made this worse was how visible the contrast became. Caitlin Clark's campaigns looked modern, bold, and aspirational. League content felt careful, restrained, and cautious. To a sponsor, that reads like misalignment. And misalignment leads to one unavoidable conclusion. The league isn't steering the ship. It's reacting to it. That realization doesn't spark outrage. It sparks recalculation. Sponsors don't abandon ship immediately. They reposition. They wait. They watch. They prepare for multiple outcomes. And that waiting period is brutal for an organization because it means decisions are being judged in advance. Every move is scrutinized. Every silence is noticed. Every missed opportunity becomes part of a growing internal case study titled something like, "Are we backing the right strategy?" This is why Stephen A. Smith framed the moment as self-sabotage. Not because leadership was malicious, but because they appeared disconnected from how modern sports economics actually work. In today's landscape, stars don't drain value from leagues. They generate it, but only if the league knows how to amplify instead of compete. Right now, the perception among sponsors was simple and dangerous. Caitlin Clark knows where the future is going. The league doesn't seem sure, and uncertainty is poison to long-term investment. Once that perception forms, it doesn't matter how many reassurances are given publicly. The money already knows where it wants to go. And when money starts drifting before leadership adjusts, the outcome is rarely kind. Because at that point, the league isn't just managing a controversy. It's racing against lost momentum. And momentum, once it shifts away, is almost impossible to chase down again. What made this moment so unsettling wasn't anything Caitlin Clark said. It was what she didn't do. She didn't demand an apology. She didn't threaten to leave. She didn't weaponize her audience. She simply kept moving forward. And that's how power actually shifts quietly. While leadership tried to regain narrative control, Caitlin Clark disengaged from the entire structure that was supposed to define her career. She didn't wait for validation. She didn't seek alignment. She didn't attempt reconciliation. She just continued being unavoidable. Every game she played felt heavier than the last, not because of pressure, but because of clarity. There was no chaos in her approach, no visible frustration, no emotional reaction to the noise surrounding her. That calm unsettled people, because institutions are trained to deal with conflict. They're terrible at dealing with independence. Independence removes leverage. When Caitlin Clark showed that she didn't need to participate in the conversation, that she didn't need to respond, explain, or defend, the league lost its most powerful tool: control through engagement. Every attempt to reframe the story now felt one step behind her reality. Broadcast numbers told the story first. Games involving Caitlin Clark weren't just outperforming expectations, they were redefining baselines. Viewership spikes didn't flatten after controversy. They hardened. That's the difference between a moment and a foundation. A moment fades. A foundation compounds. Her audience didn't just show up. They stayed. That's what terrified leadership. Because once attention becomes habitual, it no longer belongs to the league. It belongs to the person who created the habit. And Caitlin Clark had done exactly that. Behind the scenes, language began changing. Executives stopped speaking in certainties. They stopped issuing confident projections. They stopped pretending this was temporary. Instead, conversations became conditional. What if she doesn't want to engage? What if she doesn't need us? What if we can't steer this anymore? Those questions weren't theoretical. They were logistical. Because for the first time, leadership had to confront a reality it had never planned for. A player with leverage greater than the institution. Not symbolic leverage. Not social leverage. Economic leverage. Caitlin Clark had become a self-sustaining ecosystem. Her brand functioned independently. Her audience followed her, not the logo. Her relevance didn't fluctuate based on league support. That independence flipped the relationship entirely. The league wasn't managing her future. It was reacting to it. And reactions are always weaker than decisions. This is the moment when leadership realized something irreversible had happened. They no longer decided if Caitlin Clark would be central to the league's story. They only decided how awkward it would look if they weren't aligned with her. That's not power. That's concession. And Caitlin Clark never asked for it. She didn't negotiate. She didn't posture. She didn't escalate. She outgrew the system. Fans felt that shift instinctively. The narrative online changed again, but this time, it wasn't anger. It was certainty. People stopped asking, will the league embrace her? They started asking, can the league afford not to? That's the tipping point. Because once the audience frames the question that way, the outcome is no longer up for debate. The league didn't lose control because Caitlin Clark took it. It lost control because it hesitated while she kept building. And by the time leadership understood that silence wasn't submission, it was dominance, the balance had already changed. This wasn't a rebellion. It was succession. And the most unsettling part? Caitlin Clark never positioned herself as a challenger. She positioned herself as the future. And futures don't wait for permission. This is the part most organizations fear the most. Not the backlash. Not the headlines. Not even the criticism. The recalibration. Because once a league realizes it has misread the moment, everything has to be reconsidered at once. Leadership didn't just face a controversy here. They faced a misalignment with reality. And misalignment is expensive. The WNBA now sits in an uncomfortable position where every future decision involving Caitlin Clark, and players like her, will be viewed through a magnifying glass. Not because fans are hostile, but because they're alert. Alert to tone. Alert to hesitation. Alert to whether growth is being embraced or managed. That awareness changes everything. Before this moment, leadership could move quietly. Make decisions behind closed doors. Frame outcomes later. Control pacing. That luxury is gone. Now, every silence invites speculation. Every delay feels intentional. Every attempt to balance the spotlight feels like resistance. And resistance in a growth phase is lethal. What makes this especially dangerous is that the league can't undo what's already been revealed. The audience now understands that the system isn't always aligned with momentum. They've seen hesitation where confidence should have been. They've seen defensiveness where celebration should have lived. They've seen language that sounded more like control than leadership. Once fans see that, they don't forget it. They begin watching for patterns. And patterns don't reset with a single good decision. This also changes how future stars approach the league. Players entering the WNBA aren't just evaluating rosters and markets anymore. They're evaluating leadership psychology. They're asking quiet questions. What happens if I get big too fast? What happens if my brand outgrows the system? Will I be protected or managed? Those questions didn't exist this loudly before. Now they do. That's not a short-term problem. That's a generational one. Because leagues don't just compete for fans. They compete for belief. Belief that greatness will be amplified, not resented. Belief that growth will be embraced, not slowed. Belief that leadership understands modern sports economics. Right now, that belief is fractured. And fractured belief doesn't automatically heal just because numbers improve. It heals when behavior changes. That means a different posture towards star power. A different relationship with individual branding. A different understanding of who actually drives value. If leadership adapts, this moment becomes a lesson. If it doesn't, it becomes a warning. Because Caitlin Clark isn't the last player capable of this level of influence. She's the first of a new type. One who doesn't need the league to introduce her to the world. One who doesn't rely on institutional approval to matter. One who can carry an audience independently. That type of star changes the math forever. The WNBA now has a choice. It can modernize its relationship with power, or it can spend the next decade chasing relevance it once had in its hands. This situation didn't just expose a crack. It exposed a fork in the road. And whichever path the league takes next will define not just Caitlin Clark's era, but the future of women's basketball itself. What makes this moment so dangerous for the league isn't what was said publicly. It's what was revealed unintentionally. Because once people understand how power actually operates behind the scenes, they stop taking official language at face value. Words like professionalism, process, balance, and development don't sound neutral anymore. They sound strategic. And once language is exposed as a tool instead of a principle, it never fully regains its authority. That's the damage no statement can fix. For years, fans trusted that decisions were made in good faith. That leadership, even when flawed, was aligned with growth. That when stars emerged, the league would rise with them. This situation cracked that assumption. Not because Caitlin Clark was treated unfairly in one isolated moment, but because the response revealed an instinct to manage greatness instead of unleash it. And audiences are incredibly sensitive to instinct. They may not articulate it perfectly, but they feel it. They felt hesitation where excitement should have been. They felt control where confidence should have lived. They felt fear where leadership should have been steady. That feeling doesn't fade when the controversy moves on. It settles. And once it settles, every future interaction is filtered through it. When leadership talks about growth, fans will ask, on whose terms? When leadership talks about professionalism, fans will ask, for whose benefit? When leadership talks about the future, fans will ask, will you embrace it or slow it down? Those questions didn't exist this loudly before. Now they do. And that permanently alters the relationship between the league and its audience. Because authority isn't just granted by position. It's granted by trust. And trust erodes quietly, then suddenly. This is why Section 12 matters more than any other part of the story. Because this isn't about Caitlin Clark anymore. It's about whether the league understands the era it's operating in. Modern sports audiences don't just consume games. They evaluate systems. They don't just cheer stars. They watch how stars are treated. And once they decide that an institution is uncomfortable with its own momentum, they stop giving it the benefit of the doubt. That's the irreversible shift. Even if leadership changes tone tomorrow, even if messaging improves, even if numbers keep rising, the audience will remember this moment as the first time they saw behind the curtain. The first time the language didn't line up with the energy. The first time it felt like growth scared the people in charge. And Caitlin Clark didn't cause that realization. She exposed it by existing at a scale the system wasn't prepared for. That's why this moment will outlive the season, outlive the headlines, outlive the personalities involved. Because once fans understand that power can feel threatened by excellence, they never watch the same way again. The league will move forward, but it won't move forward unquestioned. And that's the real consequence. Not backlash, not criticism, not controversy. Awareness. And awareness is the one thing institutions can't control once it's been activated. This story isn't about attacking a league or defending one player. It's about power, growth, and what happens when old systems collide with new realities. And these moments don't show up on the scoreboard. They happen behind the scenes, in boardrooms, media rooms, and quiet decisions that shape everything we see on the court. If you want more stories like this, real basketball conversations, uncomfortable truths, and deep dives the headlines won't give you, make sure you're subscribed to Basket Now. Because the game isn't just changing on the court, it's changing everywhere else too.